Today's guest is Dave Calvin. He's an expert in quality assurance and food safety. He's a great example of how you can have a prolific career in the food industry and not get stuck in just one food product. He's worked in many products such as soup, pickles, baby food, cereal, and snack foods, just to name a few. All are Fortune 500 companies. We've known each other a long time, and it shows. We had a lot of fun this episode and could have gone on for several more hours. Dave will probably be back to discuss more, most likely ice cream. Well, Dave, welcome to our podcast, and we're anxious to hear everything about quality assurance, quality control, and food safety tonight. So, how long have you been in the food industry?
Maureen, I've been in the food industry for 37 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us how you got your start. Did you go to college for this?
Yes. I had a dream of being a large animal veterinarian. So I wanted to go to the Ohio State University and be a vet. And they, organic chemistry and I didn't get along. So one of the requirements of being a vet is you had to pass organic chemistry. I did fine on the labs, did fine on biochemistry, but couldn't do the memorization.
How many times did you try?
3 times.
Ooh,
yeah.
That's a lot.
3 times. It was a lot.
Nobody gave you a free pass, huh?
No free pass. So I worked on a dairy farm when I was 14 years old. So I started thinking about going into dairy science and what I could do with dairy science or ag business. And then my senior year, fall quarter, I'm in this big lecture hall, 300 some kids, Food Science 100.
Oh, okay.
And the lecture was great. And I, worked on a dairy farm, worked at grocery stores, and this class just opened up my eyes to what I took for granted and everything that was going on in the food industry, how food's distributed, how countries in the world don't have enough food, and how do they get it? How do they manufacture it? How do they trade for it? And it just opened up my eyes. And I went to the food science department and I talked to the chairman of the department and I said, hey, I was in this lecture. It was really eye-opening for me. And I said, what can I do with this degree? He chuckled. He opens up, I'll never forget this. He opens up his drawer. He pulls out this laminated sheet of paper and he goes, here's all the jobs that you can get in the food industry. And I was looking at this list and he had national salaries next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is 1985.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is awesome. So I changed my major, and luckily Ohio State had a pre-vet medicine food science curriculum. So basically for the next 6 quarters, we were still in quarters, I just took food science classes. I had everything else done.
So did it delay your graduation?
Yeah, it delayed my graduation. I was supposed to graduate that spring of 85, and I graduated the spring of 86.
Okay. So what was your first job in the food industry?
Well, outside of being on the dairy farm and working at the grocery stores, was a lab technician at Meadow Gold Dairy in Westerville, Ohio. So was testing milk trucks coming in and testing the finished products that it was a fluid milk plant and pasteurized juices.
So was your first job good, or was it like,
Oh, it was fun. It was lab testing. It was micro. Had to do some pest control, learned how to do that. It was very interesting.
So then you spent the rest of your career in quality assurance?
Yes, I did. A lot of my friends took food science to be research scientists, but I knew right away I wanted food science because I wanted to be in quality control. And the professor who's passed away, his name's Dr. Wilbur Gould. He was the big influence on my life. He was all about quality control. He wrote a book on quality assurance and quality control.
Mm-hmm. What attracted you to it?
I guess just the fact that, people go to the grocery stores and they don't really know what's behind the food that was made or what they're purchasing, right? So quality control and food safety for me was just assuring that when people do buy the food, it's to the standards, that people expect. It's safe. It's high quality. That's what I didn't have any interest in designing new foods. My interest was making sure the foods that were made were right and safe.
All right. So then where did you go after this job?
Well, that was during college. So then after I got my degree in food science, I was fortunately hired by the Campbell Soup Company and got to move back to where I grew up in Northwest Ohio. I started out as a food chemist at one of the largest Campbell Soup plants in Napoleon, Ohio.
Yeah, I remember that. That's a really big plant.
Big
when
plant.
you say a big plant, tell us how big that is.
Whew. Well, it's mammoth. I mean, I can't remember how many square feet it is, but it had its own water plant, fire department, security. I mean,
How many
plant,
How many
warehouse.
hundreds of people?
Oh, upwards of probably 2,000 people worked there.
Yeah.
Because we had the can plant.
So we're talking about
huge warehouse.
acres.
Acres, yeah.
Acres. And they made canned soup.
They made everything. They made V8. They did fresh tomato season. They did soup. They did the Prego spaghetti sauce.
Okay. And what
Pork
did
and beans.
you do for them?
So I started out as a food chemist, worked in the lab, and in 3 years I was promoted to lab manager. And at those first 3 years, it was all about quality control, just ingredients coming in or in-process testing being done. People would bring samples up to the lab, and we would do all this testing. And then I'd say in about 1988, 89, we started looking at the Deming philosophy and how people need to control their own processes and how can we empower the employees on the floor to make decisions on the fly instead of waiting for a lab test. So there'd be people out on the production floor, right, making a product. They'd put their sample in a container. They'd ship it up a vacuum tube to the lab because the plant was so large. We'd test it. They'd have to wait for us to test it. We'd write the results down on a piece of paper and send it back down to them.
Like at the bank.
Just like the bank.
The bank. Okay.
We didn't have, we had computers, but back then we were just using Excel to capture data and manipulate data. We weren't really communicating. You call Lotus.
They didn't even call you. You did it by,
sometimes they called.
Like the bank.
If they were in a hurry and was tired of waiting, they'd call you or they'd come up. But we had Lotus Notes.
So go back to this Deming thing. What's different about this again? Well,
so the Deming philosophy was about getting people empowered to own their own process. So in this culture that we started to instill at Campbell's, we started teaching the employees more about their process. We built mini labs out on the production floor and taught them how to do some of these tests so that they actually controlled the process. Viscosity was a big test for a lot of the tomato products and soup products. So it's a little instrument called a Bostwick. It looks like a trough with a gate at the end. And we taught them how to do a Bostwick. We taught them how to do colors. We taught them how to do moisture.
No, viscosity is
the thickness.
Yeah,
the thickness
of the
product.
You want your tomato sauce to be, or your tomato juice to be a certain thickness.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't, what did they do? Stop the line?
Well, then they would call us. Then we would start working on, what ifs. If it was too thick, do this. If it was too thin, do that. And then try to manipulate the formula. If there was room to do that, there was, actually ranges for starch additions or other wheat flour additions or other thickeners that were used. So we would make, sometimes they would call us to make adjustments to the formula.
Okay. So all these lab techs on the line, they didn't come up to the lab to run any tests. They
weren't lab techs. So they were the actual cooks and the operators on the line. And the lab evolved from chemists to actual trainers and auditors. So we actually trained the people how to do these tests, wrote the procedures on the what ifs, how to do it this way or, what to do if it's going that direction. And then we started teaching them how to put the data into a computer system, and use statistics. And then we started teaching them about X bar and R charts and actually how to control the process. Anything that was really complicated, like proteins or oil testing, that was all done in the lab. But a lot of the process testing, it just was a revolution back then. Everybody started doing that testing out on the floor. So quality control literally moved from the lab to the production floor in the late 80s.
Were there that many tests they did in process at that time anyways?
Not really. Not when I started. My first 3 years at Campbell Soup, all the testing was being done up in the lab.
Yeah. Was some of it like an art? Like the people just looked at it and said, yeah, that's thick enough. Let's go.
Well, there was a lot of tenure at Campbell Soup, and there was a lot of cooks that had a lot of tenure. So they kind of knew. I mean, they all had stainless spoons. They all had their spoons, and they would get a sample, a sterile sample out of the kettle, and then they would go over and use their spoon to taste it, and they could tell. Salt test was one of the tests. Some of these guys were like, I don't need a test to tell me. I can tell if I tasted it. Some of those guys had that much maturity and that tenure there.
Now, but they were really testing the quality of the product, not the safety of it.
Correct.
So they had no idea if this was safe.
Correct. Back then, the food safety was kind of built into the processes of temperature control, time, and all the retort systems, because we were dealing with high acid and low acid canned foods. So just to explain that further, a high acid product is controlled by the pH of the product. So your tomato products, high acid, low pH. And then the soups that didn't have the high acid or the low pH were then sterilized in retorts, just like home canning.
Yeah, but what kind of soups would those be?
Oh, like chicken noodle, beef consomme, beef broth.
Well, but the tomato soup was still canned.
Yeah, everything was still canned, but we had different classifications for the products.
Okay, and so the people that were on the line, they just worried about whether it tastes good, look good, and just kept passing it along, kept going. I mean, we talk about the line a lot. I hope people understand what we're talking about is it starts at the beginning with the raw materials.
Yep.
Then you make the product as it goes. In this case, soup, that means they're cooking it. They're assembling it. I got a question. How do you keep, in the canning of soup, the Campbell Soup, how do they know that this soup didn't end up with all the noodles and that one ended up with all the carrots and that one ended up with all the... Because every time I open a can of soup, they all kind of look uniform.
Yeah. Well, it all goes to R&D for what they do. Some of it is starch controlled and some of it is phase filling. So chicken noodle, for example, that product, all the cooks really did was make the broth with some of the chicken meat in it.
Mm-hmm.
That can would go into multi-stage fillers, would get the noodles, they would get the broth, and they might get a water top off. But some of the chunky soups, the soups that aren't condensed, some of those starches, are just hold the product, in suspension, the noodles, the vegetables. And then sometimes they would get a pocket filled with meat.
So they wouldn't, I always pictured them going down the line, like this one gets 4 peas, this one gets 4 carrots, this one, they didn't do that? Well, they did a good job stirring that up, I guess.
Yeah, we use some starches that would break down in thermal processing. So, everything gets added to a kettle, just like you would at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then this kettle, big blenders would be heated to the right temperatures, and then they'd get dropped down into the fillers for the cans. And some of these soups that were formulated to have the heavy starches so they could keep the garnish in suspension so that cans are consistent. That starch would then be formulated to break down under those retort conditions.
Okay, when you talk about starch, what kind of starch are you talking about?
Oh, it's modified corn starches, potato starches, different starches that were made to break down under different temperatures. Okay. If you didn't want it to break down, then you would use a different starch that didn't break down.
Okay. When you say break down, you mean?
Turn into water. It would just break the suspension.
Okay. All right. Like when I use cornstarch and I mix it with water and I put it in the pan, it thickens under heat.
Right.
So they knew.
Sometimes if you overheat those starches, they will reverse and just break down into water, that liquid stage.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I kept heating that, it would turn.
Well, it depends on the starch. I'm not an R&D scientist, so I don't know what cornstarch does, but I don't recall. But
okay. So when I was a child and you were a child, the canned soup didn't have any best by date. And now it does.
Yeah.
So how long is this canned soup supposed to be good for?
Well, anything that's retorted can last a long time, but with quality and people wanting it to be, fresh when they open it.
Mm-hmm.
Fresh is such a loose term, right? Nobody can define that, but
right.
It's typically 2 to 3 years. Like when I worked at Starkist and the tuna had a canned shelf life of 3 years. But
okay.
I can tell you that tuna went to, the military rations, and that shelf life was way beyond 3 years.
Okay. So after you left, well, actually, how much did the QA stuff change from the time you started at Campbell's till you left?
Yeah. So that kind of was start of the change. So we kind of went from quality control to the employees owning the process and teaching them how to control the process. And then in the late 90s, we started looking at food safety more. There was a lot of recalls that were popping up. The Global Food Safety Initiative was starting. It's a global organization that was a group of retailers and a group of food safety people from the industry who got together and said, we need a global food safety standard. When you're working for these CPG companies or manufacturing companies, you're getting audited by every customer on food safety. Some of our plants, were going through 10 to 16 audits a year, and they were all being, everybody was asking the same questions. So the GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, was started by the Consumers Forum Group, and they got together and said, look, we need one food safety standard, one audit that's accepted by all, and we can get rid of all these customer audits. So that happened. FSMA was starting to be talked about at Washington and regulated.
And FSMA is?
FSMA is the Food Safety Modernization Act that was signed into law by the Obama administration.
Okay.
And it really changed the food law because it required everybody to have a food safety plan. Prior to FSMA being signed, the seafood industry, the juice industry, the egg industry, and the meat industry under USDA were kind of regulated by having what we call HACCP plans. And HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. And what those plans did was identify the processes in the plant, identify the risk, how are you going to control those risks, and how are you going to rank those risks. And FSMA came into play and made everybody have a food safety plan. It was a little bit different than HACCP because the food safety plan included what HACCP was calling prerequisite programs. The food safety plan wanted those to be part of the assessment and part of the food safety risk assessment. Sanitation also came into play with the food safety plans. Food safety plans also looked at food defense and adulteration. So how do you protect the food in your plant from being contaminated by somebody who could come into the plant that's not wanted, unauthorized personnel or a disgruntled employee, the old Tylenol issue, right?
Okay.
So the Food Safety Modernization Act tried to address all those issues.
Oh, okay. For people who are really young, they probably don't know what the Tylenol thing is.
Yeah, that's true.
So go ahead, tell what the Tylenol thing.
I don't know if I remember the whole story. But
oh, he just came in and tainted
bottles opened them up.
I think it was a couple hundred bottles maybe. And they went out and the people
nobody
died.
Knew where they were.
Nope,
yeah.
They had no traceability on them or anything.
Exactly.
Well, did the GFSI, did that help the situation by getting rid of all these audits?
Yeah, I would say it did. We're kind of tilting the needle back the other way now, unfortunately. Now that I'm with Shearer's Foods and being a big co-manufacturer and private label manufacturer, we obviously go through these GFSI audits. There's different platforms. We use the SQF platform, Safe Quality Foods, but the customers are kind of swinging back and wanting to get into plants now that COVID's over. They want to get back into plants and see how their products being made. So now these customer audits are kind of picking up again.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back, because I'm going to go back to in the beginning when you get ingredients in. I know a lot of companies certified their suppliers.
Yes.
So they didn't have to test every single thing that came in.
Yep. That's another
explain
evolution.
That. Explain that.
Yeah. So, when I was at Campbell's starting out as a young chemist, we tested everything. I mean, the SpaghettiOs, right? Here's a funny story. So the SpaghettiOs, how many different size rings are in SpaghettiOs? Anybody know that answer?
I'm going to guess 3.
You're right. There's 3 sizes. There's 3 diameters of rings of SpaghettiOs. The shaped pasta as well, right? There's different shapes.
I actually thought that was a mistake. You know what I mean? Like if I found little ones, I thought it was just a mistake.
Designed that way.
Okay.
So here's a funny story. So as a chemist, we'd get these 1 pound samples, 1 pound sample of pallets and pallets of dried SpaghettiO rings, right? We'd be sitting down at a table. We'd weigh out so many out of this 1 pound sample. And we had to count how many large, medium, and small rings there were and make sure they were in spec.
Oh, man.
Well, then finally we got to the point where we started talking to our suppliers and getting them involved in statistics and supplier qualification programs. And lo and behold, you go to these suppliers and you say, well, we have a mold or a dye that goes on the extruder. And the die plate is engineered to deliver the spec. So there's no way they can cheat you.
And there's no reason to count.
So there's no reason to test.
But does it really matter if you got the exact number in each can?
In thermal processing, it actually does matter because pasta weight is one of the critical factors. Because if you have too much pasta, too much beans in these heavy, these products that thicken as they cook. If you have too much pasta, you may not get the lethality that product was designed for if there was too many big rings or too many small rings.
Oh, wait, what was that word you just said?
Lethality.
What is that?
So lethality is killing the botulism in the canned food product. So all of our thermal processes are designed to kill botulinum.
Okay, so explain what thermal processing is, because I know. But.
So that's cooking under pressure with a hermetic seals. Your
like
containers,
home canning. Okay,
like home canning. You gotta have a hermetic seal. You gotta cook under vacuum to get the temperatures that you desire.
All right, so you no longer had to count.
No, right. So once we started talking to suppliers and quality was now involved instead of, before it was just procurement, getting a contract, getting the price. But now when you got companies now reaching out and doing supplier qualifications, now you got a cross-functional team of people talking to the supplier and you're learning all these things and you're like, okay, we don't need to do this or we don't need to do that. And this makes sense.
Having a college degree person sitting there counting the
it was crazy.
That's terrible.
Yeah,
because I always heard about this. They would certify their suppliers so they didn't have to test every single vegetable, every single tomato, as you said, every little pasta ring.
I have lived from one extreme to the other. Now we hardly test anything. Right? It's all supplier qualification. Getting their third-party audits, getting their certifications, getting their allergen statements, getting their ingredient statements, and even getting the ingredient statements of the ingredients that they're buying that's coming together to make the product that we're eventually buying from the suppliers.
Right.
And then, agreeing on a specification and them certifying that each lot is meeting that specification when we get it in. Now, obviously, with all that process, we don't accept a lot of ingredients unless we have that certificate of analysis. COA is what we call it, certificate analysis.
Now, where did you work after Campbell's?
So after Campbell's, I was with Campbell's for 9 years. Then, Campbell's also got me to Green Bay. So I went from the big Campbell soup plant in Napoleon to the Campbell soup division of Vlasic Pickles.
Oh, okay.
And moved to the great state of Wisconsin.
Now, pickles are easier to do than soup, right?
Yes, but still very complicated.
Really?
Fermenting pickles outside in big fiberglass tanks was very eye-opening for me. Didn't know how to do that until I worked at Vlasic.
What do you mean in tanks?
So,
do you mean they didn't just put cucumbers in the jar and put some pickle juice on it?
So there's two different types of pickles out there. There's fresh packed pickles and there's fermented pickles. So fresh packed pickles are sometimes refrigerated and sometimes they're acidified enough and pasteurized enough. So we don't need that intense heat like you do for soup or pickles because we're using acidified brines. But fresh packed pickles are typically crunchier, have a brighter green color.
Okay.
And sometimes refrigerated. Vlasic didn't have any refrigerated fresh packed products. The competitors like Mount Olive, Clausen, they had the refrigerated. But those, you had the fresh pack and the fermented. So the fermented ones is where you can't pack all the fresh pickles because you don't have the capacity. So you put those out in tank farms. They call them tank farms, which are sometimes wood tanks, some are fiberglass. But you fill them up with a salt brine and you let the lactobacillus bacteria, the good lactobacillus bacteria, grow and ferment the pickles under an oxygen, an oxygen treatment where we were pumping air into the tank, getting the air right to get the lactobacillus to grow.
How big a tank?
Oh, twice as big as this table. I mean, these vats were, I can't tell you how many bushels, but they were pretty large. Yeah.
And they were in a building?
They were outside. They were outside. Yep.
And they had lids on them, I suppose.
They did, but they didn't have lids on them all the time. Yep. So the lids were just basically 2x6s or 2x8s that were laid across the tops of these tanks. And, it would take, these tanks would ferment all year, ferment all winter. And then in the winter time, you pulled out of them. And in the spring until you got the fresh crop, that's where you got your pickles to pack. So a lot of relish. Relish is made with fermented pickles, your hamburger chips.
So did they take the fermented pickles and then make relish?
Yes.
So they're sitting out there in these vats or these things.
Tank farms, yeah.
And they have lids on them. But snow, rain?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then they take the pickles out. And they grind them up and make relish.
Yeah, we would take the pickles out of these fermentation tanks, and then we would bring them in. Then we'd have to desalinate them. So we'd have to put them in water.
You're rinsing them.
And, we're drawing the salt out. So the salt is keeping them from rotting.
Okay.
And keeping that lactobacillus in check.
Okay.
So they're so salty that we have to actually take the salt out of them to be able to put them in the jars for people to eat.
Okay. And so you put like new pickle juice on it or something?
Yes, we'd put a new brine on it, a fresh brine with garlic or herbs or what other spices. Some of them were heavy syrup, corn syrup to make the sweet dills or the sweet hamburger chips.
Piccalilli, we used to call that.
Yeah.
So they still make pickles this way?
Yeah.
Oh,
yep,
all right.
Nothing's changed.
I'm thinking snow, rain, everything on these pickles, and that doesn't matter. And they didn't freeze.
Not with the air. So with the air tubes in the tanks and keeping the tanks agitated, they didn't freeze. Well, the salt content was so high, no, they didn't freeze.
Yeah, because I'm thinking you're in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
It was pretty cold.
It was pretty cold. All right. Well, that's interesting. Do you still eat pickles?
Oh, absolutely. Love them. I still buy the pickles that the Wisconsin brand that Vlasic owned was called Milwaukee's Best.
Yeah.
Not the beer, the pickles. And you can still buy them at Meijer.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Pittsburgh pickle?
Yes, the Pittsburgh Pickle Company.
We call them the Pickle Brothers. They're pretty cool guys. They started making pickles.
Yeah.
And they only did it because they thought that they had the best recipe for their bar because they own a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody loved them and people started wanting to take some home. So they started making pickles. And I guess canning pickles in your back room is pretty easy. So they now have a little warehouse and they manufacture pickles and all these pickle things.
Became a craft business for them.
Yeah.
I actually looked at the plant that they bought. That plant that they bought in Verona actually was a family-owned business that was making pasta.
Okay.
And the family was trying to sell the pasta business. And I actually was this close. It was close to being interested enough to put an offer out on it. My wife and I toured it on a weekend. The family was very, open for us to come in on the weekend to look at the business. They loved my background, obviously. And it was just going to be too big, not the right time for me. Yeah. So then they sold out to these guys that turned it into a pickle business.
Yeah. They now co-manufacture for other people too. Mm-hmm. But they are very devoted to their pickles. They love those pickles. And I looked on their website, they now make pickle juice because I guess people think pickle juice is something you should drink.
Well, that's how Gatorade started.
It is?
Yeah. So Gatorade was developed at the University of Florida. Learned this in food science. It was actually basically pickle juice with some other ingredients in it. That was the first Gatorade. So all that sodium, those electrolytes that were in the pickle juice is what gave the athletes that rehydration.
But now they've gone to the sweet side. I don't like Gatorade.
But now they're some of these products are coming back because of the benefits of pickle juice.
Yeah. Okay. So you left the pickle business. And then where'd you go?
So I left the pickle business, and then being in Wisconsin, you had to be a cheesehead, right? So I started in a cheese company. It was the third largest cheese company in the United States. It was the largest Italian cheese maker in the United States.
And who was that?
And I worked for them for 3 years. That was Stella Cheese at the time.
Oh, okay.
So,
and what kind of cheese did you make?
We made Italian cheeses. We made soft cheeses like ricotta, and then we made blue cheese. Then we made the hard cheeses like Parmesan, Romano, Asiago.
All right, tell me how you make blue cheese. I love blue cheese, but everybody thinks that blue cheese is rotten.
Oh no! So again, just like pickles, right? You're wanting this good bacteria to turn turn the cucumbers into pickles. Same thing with blue cheese. You've got this cheese curd that you're inoculating with bacteria, and I can't remember the bacteria, but it's a lactobacillus-based bacteria as well. But you inoculate the curd, and then under the right temperature and conditions, that bacteria grows to create the blue color and the flavor. So
they pack all those curds in a container and then inoculate it and it makes the blue vein?
The vat of curd, once the cheese is set, they inoculate it in the vats.
Okay. I see all these videos now on how to make your own cheese at home. With the milk and the vinegar or something.
Yeah, that's how you make ricotta.
Yeah. You take that out and they show you how to make fresh mozzarella this way and stuff. So the blue vein is the inoculated part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then it's not unsafe to eat.
Oh no, not at all.
No. I love
There's
blue
a
cheese.
lot of bacteria that's used in food that makes the food what it is that's safe to eat.
Yeah.
Not all bacteria is bad.
I know, but many people think it is.
Yeah.
If you have bacteria in your food, then there must be something wrong with it. So you did that for 3 years, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we've covered soup, pickles, and cheese. Okay. Where are we going next?
Now I'm heading south. And I'm working at the world's largest baby food plant in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So moved on to Gerber Baby Food.
And what kind of baby food are you making? Are you in the fruits and
We
are you
did
all of it?
everything. We did the smokehouse with the little meat sticks.
Oh.
We did dry cereal, and then we did all the wet fruit and vegetables,
Okay.
glass jar.
And all the little dinners and everything?
See, back then it was just the glass jars. We didn't do
the little
the mix. Yeah. Like,
okay. So I always find it interesting that pet food and baby food are the only food that we sell where who eats it is not the person who bought it.
Yeah.
So you have to make baby food appeal to the parents so they'll feed it to the kid, and you have to make it so it appeals to the child.
Right. That's where the food safety and the trust really was a huge part of the Gerber business and the Gerber culture. Great company to work for. Food safety was easy, right? I mean, there was no gray. It was black and white. If there was any doubt, throw it out. There was a line in the plant. So after the food was processed in the retorts, so again, low acid canned food, some of it was high acid. It was a lot cheaper to throw it away before it got labeled, cartoned, shrink wrapped, put in the warehouse. So food safety, zero tolerance for any issues.
But many of those were single ingredient, so there wasn't.
Yeah, right.
You if it passed the certification coming in, you processed it correctly. It was kind of a no-brainer because you didn't have anything to fault it.
There was a lot of analytical testing that was done on the raw materials coming in. So a lot of produce was coming in. The sweet potatoes, the beets, the apples, the peaches, a lot of testing, a lot of looking for insects and larvae, stuff like that. Pesticide testing, holding our growers accountable. So we talked earlier about supplier qualifications and relying on COAs. Baby food was a lot different where you just really, the company had the trust with the families, the mothers, the parents, right? So we trusted our suppliers. We had contracts and we had these requirements, but we still did a lot of verifications at the plant.
Talk about the pests, because there's a lot. I don't think people realize that there is a certain amount of pest is allowed in our food. Yep. I mean, if a fly drops in a vat, they don't throw it away.
No, people are not going to want to hear this, but
go ahead.
The FDA has a guidance document out there that allows for certain insect fragment parts to be in foods.
Now, I always heard this story that oatmeal allowed a certain percentage of mouse droppings in its oatmeal.
That is adulteration. I don't know if that story.
Well, they can't have 100%. It can't be 100%. Their oatmeal looks like a lot of things.
Yeah.
And they said, you know what? If we found some in there and it was tested less than, I always heard that fig Newtons had so many flies in it.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because all the flies buzzing around, there's no way they could keep the flies out.
Yeah. The fruit flies were the biggest issue with fruits and vegetables and them laying eggs. That was probably the biggest thing that we were looking for. I mean, we did do insect frags on cereals, grains that were coming in. But Gerber had high standards and, high expectations. If the raw materials didn't meet our specs, those raw materials were typically sold to another processor where those types of standards didn't matter, right? Yeah. So, if mold count was high on squash or trying to think what else, any other fruits or vegetables, if the mold count was high, maybe it could go to another plant where it was maybe being processed as pet food or being processed with something else where it didn't have those standards.
Now, you said you were there when it was just glass jars.
Yeah, we did not convert the plant to plastic yet, to the aseptic plastic packaging yet.
Okay, because I know it went from glass jars to little plastic containers to now pouches.
Yeah.
So it's gone through a big transition there.
Yeah. Now, after my time.
Yeah. The Gerber, I don't know if they probably don't even make those little meals anymore, like the chicken dinner and things like that. Those were really They were awful.
You mean in the same jar?
Yeah.
Yeah, they still did. Like noodles with meat in it
Yeah.
or a vegetable mix.
I wonder if people buy those little wieners that were in the jars. You know what I mean? Those little smoke, whatever you call them.
We had our own smokehouse.
I wonder if people still buy those.
You know,
I couldn't buy, you know what? Talk about a parent who couldn't feed their kids certain things. I looked at those and they had water in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go, I'll feed them a hot dog.
Yeah. They're pretty close to hot dogs.
That's right. They probably were safer.
Controlled.
They were probably safer than a hot
safer.
dog.
Yeah.
And I would feed my kid a hot dog.
Yeah.
Because I went, oh, that is so gross.
Well, it was all about choking, right? So one of our critical control points was the size of the particle. So obviously a lot of Gerber baby foods are pureed, but once you get into like the toddler links or even that second step or third step that they have now with the pieces, the FDA says that if anything is larger than 7 millimeters, it's a choking hazard. Okay. So there was a lot of control to make sure that our particle sizes were small enough. Okay. So that's why the hot dog is not as safe as the little weenies that, the little smokies that we did because they were the right diameter.
Right. We were supposed to cut our hot dogs up.
Yeah.
Make sure they weren't a choking hazard. I didn't measure it, but, make sure. Well, go back to HACCP for a second, because I don't think people really understand that when you're making a food product, some of these critical control points might be that you heated to the right temperature, that you added certain ingredients so that it was. So talk about that for a little bit. Yeah.
So different products have different critical control points. Like a high acid food, if you want to heat the container as well as the product on a high acid food so that you're killing any bacteria that's in the package or in the container. Aseptic pouches that you mentioned earlier, that goes through a filling unit that is a sterile unit within itself. Sometimes there's a hydrogen peroxide or some other sterile agent that's sprayed on the nozzle before it's taken apart, before it's filled, and then sprayed again before the closure goes back on. But it's all, filled under aseptic conditions. But, temperature is critical, time is critical, cleanliness is critical. As I said earlier, weight, and thickness of products is also critical. If a product is designed to be a certain thickness, and if it's too thick, that thermal process that you've established may not be enough for it.
Okay. I mean, there's lots of controls set that have nothing to do with food safety or anything. They just set controls for, like you said, weight, like making sure that.
Yeah, but that weight is correlated to a food safety event, because if that weight's not right, if you got too much pasta or too many beans in a can, you may not get the right lethality, and therefore you may still have that risk of Clostridium botulinum in the can. Okay. So that's where it comes into play. All the critical control points for HACCP plans really relate only to food safety and not quality.
Yeah. Now, when you had, I know you weren't at Gerber when this happened, but when they first came out with all the pouches, there was an episode, and I don't know if it was across several companies or just one company, where there was black mold and everything in the pouches, and parents were demanding clear pouches so they could see the food inside.
Yeah, that was one of the benefits of having the glass jars at Gerber was, people could see the product. They could see the color. They knew what that color was supposed to be. They could see the viscosity or the thickness of that product.
Yeah. But do you remember that happening? It was just a few years ago.
Yeah. I don't recall exactly what happened.
Yeah. I don't know what company it was, but it just suddenly within the year, we see a lot of clear packages. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel better about that. Yeah. When they first came out, I didn't think to hand it to my child to eat. Yeah. I actually squirted it on the spoon, and fed them. I never thought that you're supposed to hand it to them. And now they don't even know how to use spoons. You just hand them the food and they just
unscrew the top and suck it down like a straw.
My grandkids have figured out how to roll it up so they get everything out of it.
Yeah.
And and they know now to ask for help if they want you to get all of the whatever out of the pouch. Yeah. That was pretty cool.
I think that's the great thing of going from glass to plastic is, there was a lot of risk with glass shards and breakage in the line. I mean, those fillers, They were high-speed fillers. We're talking 1,200 jars a minute being filled. I mean, you'd have to have a camera to actually see your line run to make sure everything was timed perfectly, because the line was running so fast you couldn't even. It was just one single blur.
So, what did they do if a jar broke?
So we had to shut down. We had these glass-free zone parameters that we followed. We had to clean so many feet away, complete wash down, a lot of people with flashlights inspecting to make sure there was not one bit of piece of glass fragment anywhere on the floor or on the production line or anything before we started back up again.
So how often would that happen?
It happened more than, when it did happen, it was, all hands on deck. You might get 2 or 3 a week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We had good engineers at Gerber, and our lines ran really well.
Okay. So then after Gerber, where did you go?
So that's when I
think you covered all of them, but let's go.
Well, then that's when I joined the H.J. Heinz company. In 2000, I joined Heinz, and Heinz was a good fit because at the time they were making baby food in Pittsburgh here. They were making pickles. They had a huge plant in Holland, Michigan that were making pickles. And then, of course, Pittsburgh plant in Muscatine was making soup. And then they were making all the acidified condiments.
They were just waiting for you.
Yeah, they were just waiting for me.
So the baby food they made, it was Heinz baby food, right?
Yeah.
So Gerber was number 1 in the United States.
Right.
But wasn't Heinz like number 1 in Canada or something?
Heinz was number 1 in Canada. Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And Gerber was number 1 in the U.S.
Yeah.
And Heinz was a close second, sometimes second or third in the U.S. with Heinz Celestial Foods, playing a role in that market.
Was that the beech nut?
Yeah, beech nut, right.
Yeah.
Oh, I should have said beech nut, not Hain. Yeah, beech nut was in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't even remember Heinz baby food. I guess I think I was past that or something. But they were the glass jars and they were the same thing.
Yep, glass jars. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But Heinz doesn't do baby food anymore, do they?
No.
They sold that off? Did they sell it off, or did they just send it to Canada?
Well, we tried. If my memory serves me right, we tried to buy beech nuts.
Okay.
And then, the antitrust people stepped in and said, no, you're going to monopolize the baby food market, even though Gerber was a large number 1 player, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't think, beech nut and Heinz coming together was good for the U.S. people, for the population. So that didn't go through. When that didn't go through, we just kind of we did some private label for Hain Celestial that I remember, but then it just kind of disappeared. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think they do it anymore.
No.
Do they still do pickles?
Yes. Still have a big plant in Holland, Michigan doing pickles.
Okay. Now, I always was fascinated with Heinz that the products in the United States were not always the same as the products in Europe.
That's correct.
They would make totally different things over there.
Yeah. Heinz ketchup is a great example.
Okay.
Where if you go to Canada, even Canada, not even Europe, if you go to Canada, my first time going to Canada with Heinz and eating Heinz ketchup, I was shocked by how sweet it was. But it's much, they use sugar, and it's a higher sugar content in Europe and in Canada. They like that sweeter ketchup taste, where in the United States, it's more of I call it a sugar acid balance. You get the balance.
All right, let's talk about food safety for a second with ketchup, because I know you go into a restaurant and there's I got tons of questions here, but you go into a restaurant and back in the day when I worked in a restaurant, we refilled all our ketchup bottles.
Oh, I know.
And we didn't always refill it with Heinz ketchup. We refilled it with whatever, but we kept the Heinz bottle around because especially Western Pennsylvania, you better have Heinz or you better just leave town.
Right.
So we would do that. How did that affect Heinz if something happened?
Yeah. It affected Heinz a lot because if the bottles got contaminated, even though that product has the right pH, to preserve itself on the table, if it got contaminated, it would grow the wrong bacteria like lactobacillus, the wrong lactobacillus, and you get these white spots and gas production. I don't know. I've people would complain, hey, was at the restaurant. I opened up your Heinz ketchup bottle, and when I opened the bottle, the ketchup just came gushing out.
Oh, yeah. They burp on you.
Right. So that's just telling you that it was contaminated, and that bacteria is producing gas. And then that gas is trapped underneath the lid. And then you open the lid, and then somebody's getting a shower of ketchup.
We needed a public, announcement about that.
Well, people shouldn't be doing that. That was a real problem for us.
No, it's needed for the consumer. So I know if I went to a restaurant and did that, I should have had there should have been like if we should have a Facebook page about that. So we would go and I'd know. I'm telling you, I know. And I'd be like, oh, I used to actually think it was a full bottle. I'd do that. I thought it was fresh. So now you're telling me I was a contaminated one.
Yeah, I mean, when you open up a fresh bottle of ketchup, a new bottle, you should just hear that vacuum seal break. Not that, you should hear vacuum coming out and then not the gush. So Heinz went to a food service bottle that you couldn't remove the cap. Now, obviously, the glass bottles, we couldn't do that. So we were trying to get all the restaurants to convert to these plastic bottles. They came out with the upside down bottle, and then they designed a cap that you couldn't unscrew it.
And then they did the thing where they made the bottle red. So now, now you couldn't tell it was empty unless you picked it up. Right. Because I think that's what most restaurants had a problem with, was having all of these bottles on the table, and this one has this much.
Right.
And, they wanted them all to look full.
Right. No, there was many times I'd go to restaurants and it's like they hand me the ketchup bottle and there's nothing in it because it's red.
Yeah.
And they couldn't tell.
Yeah. But I know that in some of the restaurants I worked in when I was a kid, that they had all of the, every night we would refill them. So they'd be down halfway. So some of that ketchup in there might have been in there for years that never made its way out of the bottle.
Yeah, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing. But this is back in the day when we knew nothing about food service. We knew nothing about shelf life. We thought all ketchup could be sat on the table forever. How long can a bottle of ketchup sit on the table?
Because it's a restaurant food service bottle, it really wasn't designed to stay on the table, for more than a couple weeks. We would expect that bottle to be consumed in a couple days. It's really better to put the ketchup back in the refrigerator. So
I go to this restaurant one time. I think it was down in West Virginia or something. And they had the pump thing for ketchup. Fill your little cup, and I did it. And I said to the girl, I said, "This is not Heinz." She says, "Yes, it is. It says Heinz on there." I said, "No, it's not. This is not Heinz." I said, "I know what Heinz tastes like, and this is not Heinz." And they were just refilling it with whatever store brand ketchup that they could, and left the Heinz label on it.
Yeah. When I was in the quality team, we would go to these different restaurants and we would tell the owners, we'd call them out on it. And then we would get the salespeople to come back and do a revisit and talk to them and try to understand why that was happening. And, it was bizarre because it wasn't safe. I mean, it's a safe product. It was hard to, ruin it, but it wasn't our quality. You're expecting Heinz quality, and it's not there. So we tried to fix those problems.
Yeah, you're expecting the Heinz taste.
Yeah.
You wanted that. And so how long were you at Heinz?
13 years.
And what was your final position there?
Oh, like assistant director to quality and regulatory affairs. I don't know. I had so many different positions in those 13 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So you brought up something interesting, regulatory affairs. How does regulatory affairs fit in all this food safety and quality assurance and everything?
Yeah. So that's regulatory affairs is interesting because there's kind of two sides to it. The one side of it is the label side of things and making sure that everything that's on the package that the consumer buys is meeting the regulations, and that nutrition statement is correct, and that the ingredient statement, the formula, is all coming together to make sure that those nutrients are delivered that's stated on the package. So that there's a lot of regulatory work that's done there with ensuring the allergens are declared correctly, any certifications like gluten-free or non-GMO or halal or kosher certifications. All that work's involved in that labeling process. The other part of the coin with regulatory affairs is just keeping up on, the FDA regulations and what's hot for them. FDA has gone through different things in my career where, arsenic in rice was a big issue. So it was keeping up on that and how they were doing market basket inspections at the grocery store where they're pulling product off the shelf and doing all this arsenic testing.
Why would there be arsenic in it?
Well, rice inherently has arsenic in it because of the way it's grown. The arsenic is inherent in our environment. It's inherent in the soil and in the water. So the way rice is grown in the rice fields, just inherently has arsenic in it when it's processed, harvested and dried and processed. Carrots have a trace of arsenic. There's different. How
do you get rid of arsenic in rice?
Well, you don't. You just gotta control your consumption of rice. The FDA has set thresholds based on their market basket study, I should say. They've set thresholds, and it's just to control the arsenic is to control where you're growing it. So you gotta monitor your soil and your water conditions, and try not to plant those crops in those areas or fields that may have high levels of arsenic or cadmium or other heavy metals.
So would it matter which country you get it from?
Not necessarily. I mean, we're talking about rice that was being grown and harvested here in the United States, especially Arkansas. Arkansas is a big rice producing state. And,
okay.
If FDA was to come out and say, the threshold is here, but capability wise, these farms are above that threshold, that could have a huge impact on the industry. But, FDA has safe levels defined for arsenic, and it's really up to the farmer to test their product and make sure they, move growing, rotate crops, move fields, control it.
How does the FDA decide what's safe? I mean, is it safe to them, or it's like what?
Yeah,
what the word safe mean?
They look for research. They look to see if there's any research that's been done at universities on, consumption of arsenic and what the effects of that consumption is. They do that research. If there's no research out there, they may consult with the universities or other health organizations to do those types of studies. But
I don't know. Part of me thinks that 0 is what we need in arsenic.
Yeah.
But you're saying that can't be accomplished.
Can't be accomplished.
So we're going to get arsenic in it whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
Would we get that in the rice that we just have at home? Like we cook?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
white rice is probably worse than brown rice. If you had an option to pick white or brown, pick brown. Brown has lower levels of arsenic.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I've never.
I don't want to scare anybody, but
I've never heard that before. That kind of scares me right now.
No, I shouldn't be scared.
Having arsenic in
and it goes all the way back, right? Always talking about balanced diet, making sure, that you're eating a good rotation of foods.
Is arsenic something that stays in your system, or is it something that goes out? Like people say you have too much potassium, but it does kind of too much sodium. That obviously goes out of your body.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell. I can't.
Well, you think about all the people that eat rice. Like, think about Chinese people always eat rice. They don't seem to be dying from arsenic poisoning.
Let's cut that out.
I don't know if we will or not.
Well, it's the same thing with mercury and tuna, right? I mean, everybody's complaining about mercury content in tuna, but you got these guys are out on fishing vessels for 2 months. Guess what they're eating most of the time?
Yeah.
They're eating what they catch.
Right. And they seem to be fine.
Yeah.
That's why I asked if the FDA has these certain levels. But, I mean, obviously, we have some of these things in our environment, so we're going to get them in our food.
Right. So FDA does monitor our food supply for different things. And these I call them hot topics. They come up once in a while. And the regulatory affairs people, they kind of keep an eye on that stuff to keep the business up to date on these types of things. Mercury in tuna, they monitor that. There's still safe levels of tuna out there. Obviously, there's certain companies that are marketing themselves as being lower than other companies for mercury content, but it's inherent in the tuna, it's inherent in the fish. But FDA just does a great job of monitoring those values and just seeing where there's hot spikes in different regions of the world.
Yeah, now we talk about FDA a lot, but there's USDA. And I know that there's two arms to the USDA. USDA is the fruit and vegetables, but the USDA is the meat industry.
Right. So FDA has, fruits and vegetables and the what you call sandwiches and stuff like that. USDA has the poultry and the beef and, the other meat products. The USDA, different philosophies. USDA actually is in the plant.
Every single plant that has meat in it.
Yep. They're in usually 2 or 3 shifts of inspectors. They're in the plant at least 12 hours a day. Some of these inspectors are assigned to multiple plants, so they're not at your plant all day. They may go to another plant for part of their shift. But USDA is on site. USDA was the first to come out with HACCP. And the USDA just has a closer eye on things.
Is it because of its meat or is?
Yeah, well, it kind of all goes back. I'm not 100% sure how USDA got started, but the meat industry had a bad rap. Wiley was working for the FDA, and he, this goes, trying to test my memory here, but this goes back, I don't know what year it was, but back in, where meat was being processed in the Chicago area.
The Chicago stockyards.
Yeah, Chicago stockyards. And then the Army was buying a lot of canned meat, and it really wasn't meat. It was just junk. It was all the byproducts and stuff like that. So, Wiley was I can't think of his first name. Wiley was part of the FDA. He was calling this stuff out. He couldn't get, the lobbyists were kind of controlling the FDA. So he couldn't get his message out there. So he moved to the USDA branch. And I think his work on trying to get the meat industry cleaned up is what led to the USDA. That's my recollection.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being in the industry 37 years, I think it's time for the FDA and the USDA to merge and just be one group. The FDA spends a lot more time on drugs and pharmaceuticals than food, and that's my perception. I think, some of our plants, the food manufacturing plants that are under FDA control, they're only looked at maybe once every 3 years. And the FDA wants to try to control the global food supply. And through FSMA, they've kind of done this with foreign supplier verification program. They've instilled in these foreign suppliers that the food products that they make that are exported to the United States have to meet our standards and our regulations. So through the foreign supplier verification program, there's a lot of the hazard analysis, the risk, the documentation that has to come into that importer of record. That importer of record is usually the broker or usually the company that's selling that product if they have a base here in the United States. And they're responsible for making sure all that paperwork's right. But the FDA just doesn't have the bandwidth, and obviously the USDA doesn't have all the bandwidth either, but they're at least regulated to be in the plants at the sites for live inspections.
What do you think the public misunderstands about FDA and USDA?
I'm not sure, because if the public consumer thinks that FDA is in the plant all the time, that's a misconception. They're not. If the consumer thinks that they're out there in China and other parts of the world making sure all the food that's coming to the U.S. is safe, they're not there that often. They just don't have the resources,
Well, talk about traceability, because I think that one thing we haven't talked about, and I think that people don't understand, which does make our food so safe, is that all the quality people trace everything, record everything. And I would say the misunderstanding people have is they think that the FDA has all these records. It's really the company has all the records. So if something happens to a product and I report it to a company, talk about the traceability.
Yeah. So traceability is really important. All the companies I have worked for, we make sure that we do internal audits on traceability. It's important as part of the checks of the product and the process to make sure that that code is legible and the code is correct. But traceability is important in case there is an issue, so that you can identify where that product was distributed to and who has it. And then on that receiving end, they can find that product and pull it from the shelves or do what they got to do as part of the disposition of that issue. So, FDA, FDA is now starting to come out with a heavier stance on traceability requirements. It's called the Smarter Era of Food Safety. And Frank Yanis, who was the deputy commissioner FDA, he came out with this wanting better traceability, especially in the fruits and vegetables when they had a lot of issues with recalls and you really couldn't figure out where the produce was coming from, what farm. It's very hard for that head of lettuce to be identified exactly where that farm was. You could probably trace it back to the distributor,
but the state.
Well, maybe, but that distributor, if he had good records, could trace it back to the state, and if he had really good records, he could trace it back to where he bought it from the farmer.
Right.
But traceability is all about tracing that finished product all the way back to where that was either harvested or manufactured.
Because if they do that and there is a recall, you could say only these products from this manufacturer, so the whole country doesn't have to panic on a recall.
Yeah, it does two things. One is it helps identify the source or where it was made or where it was harvested. Sometimes on the lettuce recalls, they just don't know. Now, on the Jensen Farms cantaloupe recall that happened, they had the traceability records. They knew it was the Jensen Farms. But if it helps the government or the FDA to know exactly where the source is so they can isolate it and not have a widespread panic where you can't buy lettuce anymore, or you can't buy tomatoes anymore because they've taken everything off the shelf because they have no idea where the source was. So it helps on that part, but it also helps on the manufacturer's end, so they can help identify the amount of product that is impacted if there is a recall.
Now, can't they find sometimes, like, let's take lettuce. Lettuce is fine, but it gets contaminated at where it's being used, like the restaurant. And can't they go back and say it wasn't the supply, it was the restaurant?
Sometimes the issue actually originates in the farm because of the irrigation practices.
Right.
So a lot of the produce issues that we've had in the past with salmonella and listeria issues, or E. coli issues for that matter of fact, is because of the water sources. The farms were growing the vegetables, and a half mile or a mile or 2 miles down the road was a cattle ranch. And, the cattle are doing what they got to do in the field. And then the rain pushes that into the water supply. Then that water supply was used for the vegetables. And then they become contaminated actually at the source of the farm. But it can be also poor water being used at the processing site, not using potable water or chlorinated water. Sometimes the water now is treated with ozone to kill the bacteria, so it's rinsed better.
Yeah. So if they keep records, we can figure these things out.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. Now, when you make products in a manufacturing facility, don't they pull samples off of like every run or something and keep samples, or at least they keep numbers? So if something goes wrong, they have all the records from every run.
It's easy to do that. to have retained samples when it's a shelf stable product, but
Mhm.
when you got a short shelf life, it's hard to do, especially with vegetables or dairy. You don't really find those retention samples being
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. So just on the manufactured, you can't do
Shelf
that.
stable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I tell people this all the time. You have a short window on some of these products to test them because you can't put a loaf of bread on the shelf and say, we'll test it next week.
Right.
It'll be rotten next week.
Yeah. Well,
You have to test it. You have, like if you're in the automotive industry, and some people will try to make that change. They'll go from quality at the automotive industry and they want to come into the food industry. And they don't understand you do not have the luxury of time.
Right.
Because that bolt can sit there for 2 years before you test it. But this food product has a short window to test it and get it out the door.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that in the dairy industry and now working for Shearer's Foods in the salty snack business. That product's going right out the door. We've got a 7-hour window to get all of our testing done and get all our paperwork reviewed before that product is on a positive release going out to a truck to go to the customer, because potato chips or salty snacks that we make on a Monday could be in the store by Wednesday.
Wow.
Quick.
So when you have, look at the FDA and the USDA, when you have things coming in from other countries, and I think of something like avocados, because we don't grow this. Yeah. Coffee, chocolate, cocoa beans, all those things coming from other countries. What do they have to do once is there any control over this?
So goes back to the foreign supplier verification program. Whoever that broker is or whoever that customer is that's buying those materials, they've got to have all that third-party certification, the COAs, records of their critical control points and how they're controlling them. They need to have all this documentation before it comes in, because the FDA is going to audit the broker or the customer that's bringing that material in. And, they have to have all this. The FDA has to have this plant registered in their reportable food register, or I'm sorry, their plant registration. I got confused with reportable food registry is what we do for recalls, but all these plants need to meet these requirements. They got to be identified with the FDA, and they're not going to get across the border if they don't have the right paperwork, they don't have the right identification.
Okay.
But yeah, there's still issues with adulteration out there. There's still issues with economic adulteration, where you think you're buying mackerel or mahi, and it's not that species of fish, or tuna. There's olive oil that are sometimes
that's a big one,
tainted with soybean oil or some other cheap oil.
And honey,
juices, honey.
Honey's a big one. Yeah, I've read about all those, and people, you don't know what you're getting. That's why I buy my honey local. So I know I'm getting honey.
Yeah. Goes back to supplier certification programs.
Yeah, I'm certifying my own supplier
That's
in
right.
that case.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure I got the right honey. So you, I want to talk about you leaving Heinz. So I know that you left Heinz, and that was a layoff situation. And I was helping you to find a new job.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like a natural fit that you'd be perfect for StarKist. And this job had been open for a long time. They were so picky. And I was leaving on vacation. I sent your resume. They called me and said, we want to talk to him. And I'm like, here's his number. Go for it. And that is not how I operate.
Yeah.
I don't do that.
It was quick.
Yeah.
And it was right around Christmas. It was right before Christmas.
It was.
I got let go on a Monday. And I think by Wednesday, you had already submitted the resume and they were calling me.
Yeah.
Or calling you.
Yeah. And it was, I think, a Thursday or a Friday.
Thursday.
And you said you started the conversation and they said, could you come down here right now?
Yeah.
And you told me you went and ironed your pants and your shirt.
I was ironing my suit when you called me.
and you left. Now, I was going to Punta Cana for a wedding. So I had no contact with you whatsoever. The whole week I was gone. So I come back and I'm on the plane. As soon as my phone pinged that I was able to have contact, I called you. And you said, yeah, they just gave me an offer.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this was a fast turnaround.
It was. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was shocked on two fronts. One, I've never experienced anything that quickly of, getting hired by a company. And the second one was, as soon as my time with Heinz was over, I wasted no time and tried to start my own company.
Yes.
And so being hired by StarKist so quickly kind of put a damper on my starting my own company.
I know, but talk about
what worked out.
What in your own company is your love of ice cream.
Yeah.
Hey, there's still time.
Yes.
We can still do ice cream.
Absolutely.
Okay, so StarKist opened a whole new world because now you were getting to go to islands and other countries.
Yeah.
So talk about, you can mix your food safety. Tell us a few stories about going, which island you go, the Samoa Islands?
American Samoa. So yeah, I had no idea. I didn't even know what American Samoa was. So,
your education let you down, huh?
Yeah, it did. So StarKist's largest processing facility was on the island of American Samoa, which to my surprise was actually a U.S. territory.
Yep, I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's at the end of the time zone.
Yep.
So
which time zone?
The end of the time zone before you get to that international date line where it crosses.
So, but how long does it take to get there?
24 hours.
And what route do you take?
So typically you got to fly to the West Coast, but you got to get to Honolulu. So the only way to get to American Samoa from the United States is through Honolulu. Okay. You got to get on Hawaiian Airlines. And at the time it depends on the season. In the wintertime, I think there was two flights a week. And then in the summertime, there were 3 flights a week.
So once you went, you couldn't come home the next day.
Yeah. So no, this wasn't typically for me, I traveled a lot in my career. It was, go to a plant for 2 or 3 days, you turn around and come back home. Mm-hmm. No, not with this case. When I started working for StarKist, now you're going to these places that are remote and you're there for 2 weeks, 14, 15 days straight at a time before you came back. Mm-hmm. Number one, took so long to get there. Number two, the travel was expensive. So you really had to plan and prepare for your trips and create these agendas and what were you going to do, who were you going to meet, and lay these agendas out for 2 weeks so that you had a good trip. And
you were in the actual processing plants. Is that what they were actually processing?
Yep. So StarKist is there's 3 U.S. companies that manufacture tuna, but StarKist is the only U.S. manufacturer of tuna that controls the whole supply chain. So they didn't own the boats the time I was there. They had gone from owning the boats and transitioning to, contracting these fishermen to go out, but they controlled the supply chain. They controlled the fishermen. They knew who were the good ones, who were the bad ones. They controlled that. So we controlled the tuna coming in. We did end up buying some loins, but it was a very small percent of our business. Whereas our competitors, majority of their product was buying loins off the open market. It's kind of like buying wheat or corn. They buy these loins from China, from the Philippines, from Vietnam, South Korea. And then they would, have to inspect that quality in.
Now, were you processing the actual fish in the Samoa Islands, or were you getting it frozen off the ships?
Yep. So the fish, because the boats are so large, these purse-seiners are so large. Some of these purse-seiners, I can't remember the number, but they would have like 10 to 20 deep wells inside the vessel. And so, what we call them, metric tons of fish would come off these boats frozen solid. So to preserve the fish, because tuna is a species of fish that have to keep moving to regulate their body temperature. Once tuna stop moving, they actually begin to rot on the inside. So their respiration changes and they overheat. So tuna have to constantly keep swimming. They're not a fish that stays still. So once you've captured the tuna, you've got a short period of time to get those tuna from the net into the boat, into cold, very cold water. So the first thing these boats would do is they bring the nets in, and the containers or the vessels would have I'm losing my thought here. What do we call those things?
I don't know. You mean talk about the nets or the?
No, the wells. Okay, back to the wells.
Okay.
So the wells in the boat would be salt water. They'd have saltwater brine in them to get the temperature down. Once those wells were filled with the fish, then that water was pumped to an empty well, and there were coils in those wells, and that would then freeze the fish.
Okay.
So they would be like -5 degrees Celsius.
So we're freezing them to death.
Yeah. They preserve the fish. Yeah, literally.
I mean, we weren't killing them before you put them in there, right?
They were dying fast because they weren't moving.
Right.
Yeah.
So how big are tunas?
So there's different kinds of tuna. There's this, what we call the skipjack tuna, that could be any size from your hand to maybe 8 pounds.
Okay.
And then the yellowfin tuna, that tuna could be up to 2 to 250 pounds.
Okay.
And then the
are you talking about like 6 foot long, 8 foot long?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the albacore tuna, they could be anywhere from they had the widest variation. They could be anywhere from 50 pounds up to 200 pounds.
Wow. Because I remember a long time ago, you had a picture of a tuna. You were holding one, and I was like, and you had all the tuna behind you. And I was like, I thought tuna was like trout.
No.
I didn't know it was like.
Yeah. The skipjack tuna is like
trout.
Kind of like trout.
Yeah. But I was thinking they were little fish. I didn't realize that it was these.
They're like marlins.
Yeah. They were huge. So basically, StarKist knew they were getting tuna. There was no other fish in there.
Right.
They monitored all their own fish.
So when we unloaded the boats would get deducted for species that were caught that weren't. There's I don't know. There's like 20 different species of tuna out there, right? We were only really interested in 4 varieties. What we called I can't remember what it was called.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It had four kinds that you paid for.
So we had four species of tuna that we were looking for. As those boats got unloaded and we graded the fish by size, we would throw out those species that we weren't buying for. Then that weight would be deducted from the vessel. So the vessel had no incentive to capture pools of tuna that we didn't want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did they take those tunas back and give them to somebody else?
They would use them as bait, or we would give them back to them. They would probably cut them up for bait, or just take them back to the ocean for food.
Okay. And they caught tuna by net, right?
Yes. There's different types of vessels out there. Most of it was by net, but there are some vessels that were longliners. The albacore are typically caught by the longliners. So you're talking about miles and miles of fishing line with hooks dangling down, 6 to 8 feet into the water off these lines. And the albacore would get hooked on those hooks, and then they'd reel this mile-long cable in with the albacore caught on it. And then there were some vessels that the skipjack tuna would actually be caught with rod and reel. So you'd have hundreds of people on this small boat and just sticking a line with a hook on it and bringing the fish in.
That sounds like an expensive way to catch fish.
Yeah, but there's people out there that want sustainable tuna. They think sustainable tuna means it's being caught with a rod and a reel, or pole line is what we call it.
But most people are just concerned that you aren't catching like dolphins and things in the fish net.
That's the biggest issue right there. So, dolphins will only swim with tuna primarily along that Mexican Baja area there.
Okay.
So those aren't good areas to harvest tuna, because the captains know, the engineers and the captains know where these areas of the ocean where the dolphins are swimming with the tuna, so they just stay away from them. So to be dolphin certified free, the company has to go through audits, the boats have to go through audits. Sometimes there's observers that ride on the boats that actually do live audits with the captains and these engineers to make sure that they're fishing in the right areas. They audit their paperwork. They audit their handling procedures. If they do accidentally catch dolphins with tuna, they're supposed to release, and not bring that. A purse seiner is a net that then gets drawn in like a purse. They're not supposed to draw that in. They're supposed to let that fish out. So there's different procedures and protocols that they're supposed to follow.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is just staying away from those areas of the globe where dolphins swim with tuna.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on the Samoa, what do you call it? American
Samoa. Beautiful island. Yeah.
It is beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's not a touristy island. The people there are very religious. They're very family oriented. They still live in tribes. There's a leader, like we would have a mayor of a city. Mm-hmm. They would have a tribal leader.
Okay.
A lot of generations live together in the same household.
Do they speak English?
They do speak English. They do speak Samoan.
Mm-hmm. They speak Samoan when they don't want you to know what they're saying, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you stayed in a regular hotel, and
right. Yep.
And you've told me before, like if there's it's a weekend, you certainly get days off while you're there. You could go golfing. There was
a golf course, 18-hole golf course on the island. Yeah. I would golf with some of the local Samoans and the people from the plant.
Yeah.
The one thing I regret that I didn't get to do there was actually just take a boat out and just go snorkeling or scuba diving. I wish I could have had time to do that.
You didn't do that?
No, that's my biggest regret.
Huh. Are the beaches nice there?
The beaches are nice. Samoa is a volcanic island, so there are places where, you got the heavy volcanic rock.
Right.
But it's beautiful.
Yeah. I remember one time you said that you got sick. I think you got a sinus infection or something. You had to go to the hospital.
Yeah, my first trip to American Samoa.
and you said that they gave you, at the end, they gave you a bill, and it was like $5 for this. It was like they itemized it out. So
they're on social medicine.
Okay.
American doctors that come over to, they get incentives to come to American Samoa to work at the LBJ hospital, but it's they're not going to do surgeries, major surgeries, but they can take care of things like strep throat, or there's a lot of people on the island with diabetes, unfortunately. But it's a social medicine program there on the island. So a lot of people aren't really paying a lot of money like we do here in the States. It's subsidized by the government.
Yeah. But you told me it was really funny that you felt like you were back in the 50s or something.
Yeah. Getting the drugs.
So I take it Starkiss was the biggest employer on the island?
The government actually was. Starkiss was number 2. Yeah, there was a military base on the island, and, the government was pretty big there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the frozen fish came in and you canned it there?
Yes, we did cans and we did pouches. So the frozen fish comes in once we're ready. Well, once the fish are sized. So the sizing is important because the fish are actually pre-cooked by size, and you can't cook small fish with big fish, right? Because you would overcook the small fish trying to get the big fish cooked properly. So we would pre-cook the fish to get the skin and be able for the bones to come out easily.
Okay.
And then the tuna's chopped, put into a can or a pouch, added with the vegetable broth or flavorings. Sometimes it's garlic, sometimes it's other. And then it's canned, and then it goes into a retort because it's a low acid canned food. Now,
Starkiss has really made great strides in all these different flavors.
Yes, they have.
Because we used to just have tuna.
Yeah.
To make our tuna casserole or our tuna salad. And I think those are the only 2 things we ever made with tuna.
Right. Yeah.
And then they came out with a lemon pepper, a chili,
yep,
a sweet chili,
ranch.
Oh, all kinds.
Yeah.
And I learned something from one of your coworkers, Glenn Mast.
Glenn Mast, yeah. He's the man.
Yeah, I know. He knows his tuna. And he said, you want good tuna? Always buy the one in oil.
Yeah.
Especially olive oil.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you go to all these other countries, so Starkist had a plant in American Samoa. We also had a plant in Africa and a plant in South America in Ecuador. Mm-hmm. If you go to Europe or you go to these other destinations, the local people, they won't eat tuna in water. It's nasty to them. Whereas in the U.S., it's, probably 80% of the consumption is tuna in water versus tuna in oil.
Because some diet plan told us that fat is bad. And so take all the fat, all the oil, the natural oil out of the tuna, replace it with spring water, and you suddenly have something healthy.
Right.
I mean, it really, the way we eat just simply tuna casserole totally changed. The whole flavor changed once we went to oil. And sometimes I have to go to the grocery store and dig for it.
Yeah. It's usually on the bottom shelf. That's for sure. Because it's not a big seller.
No, it's hidden because people don't realize. And it's better for you. It tastes better. It's a better product.
Yeah. The oils that are in the tuna are good fats, they're healthy fats.
And they don't.
And a lot of it now is, we're Starkist was selling a lot of tuna in oil with extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah. So is tuna one of those products that, as far as food safety goes, is an easy product to handle, or is that a difficult?
That's a good question, because I would say, I worked at Starkist for 7 years. Tuna to me is the safest food out there. But the FDA made it so complicated. So it's hard to explain, but tuna is a scombroid toxin forming fish. So there's
English?
So there's only a couple species of fish that are scombroid toxin producing fish. Mahi-mahi is one of them, and tuna is the other.
Okay.
So what happens is when that fish stops swimming, as I said earlier, the tuna does begin to start rotting from the inside out. So what happens is this scombroid bacteria starts breaking down the mussels and starts creating these toxins. So if the fish is allowed to go to an extreme temperature, and an extreme temperature is, let's say, 80 to 100 degrees, and let's say that fish is mishandled for a period of 7 to 14 days, maybe 21 days, you're pushing it. But that scombroid bacteria is growing, forming toxins. Some people, it's not a fish allergy, but it's like getting stung by a bee. You get this scombroid toxin in your body, and your body starts having an allergic reaction. So you might have your tongue swell, your throat to swell. You might start feeling your skin to be heated and gets red. In extreme cases, people are going to be short of breath, feel like they're maybe having a heart attack. So those are the symptoms of ingesting tuna that is, high levels of scombroid toxin in it. So the biggest thing with tuna is controlling the temperature. And the way the industry is today, there hasn't been a scombroid toxin issue in tuna since probably the 70s.
Okay.
But the FDA keeps this on the top of the ranks as, it's a high risk food. It's an issue out there. They regulate. We got I said earlier that typically food plants are getting inspected every 3 years. Well, the tuna plants are getting inspected every year.
All right.
Because the FDA thinks scombroid is still a high risk. It's a risk, but it's not a high risk. The industry has understood this, and they've put the necessary processing steps in place to make sure it doesn't happen, because we know it could be tragic to the industry, right? And to the whole supply chain. So it kind of drives me a little. It drove me a little bit crazy that
I mean, you have to be the way you described it. You
gotta
have to be
be
reckless
Oh,
to have this
absolutely.
happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a critical control point in our HACCP plans. That's one of the reasons why seafood needs a HACCP plan, is to control the scombroid formation. But it's controlled. It's really, the industry's done a great job, and they've all worked together. We all, all the tuna industries around the world belong to these organizations, and they all work together on this type of food safety stuff.
Yeah, because one bad word and it's over.
Well, and that's the thing too with tuna, because there's only 3 players. Bumblebee had an issue, and they did a recall, and everybody thought it was everything, So a Bumblebee or a Star-Kissed or a Chicken of the Sea recall can affect the other 2.
Mm-hmm. So they all have to,
because they're all closely associated,
and
even though they're separate.
Yeah, people think of these as 3 brands, but one company.
Yeah, but they're 3 separate companies.
I know, that's how they look at it. Yeah.
But one mistake by somebody impacts the whole industry.
So was there a big difference between the American Samoa processing and the one in Ecuador or the one in Africa?
No, they were all the same. So Star-Kissed, the culture, the way they controlled the supply chain was the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're a Korean company, right?
South Korean company. Yep. Yeah. They were actually started by, the guy, Kim's his name. He was actually started out as a fisherman supplying fish to American Samoa for Star-Kissed. And then he bought boats, and then he kept growing and investing, and then became this big owner of Dongwon Food Industries.
Yeah. So which facility did you enjoy going to the most?
Actually, it was kind of a treat to go to all 3 of them because of their differences. Mm-hmm. So American Samoa, large facility, right? I mean, they were processing millions of tons of fish a day. People there are so nice, so friendly. They really cared about what they did. It was their livelihood, right? Because mm-hmm. there wasn't a lot of places to work on the island. Ecuador was a great place to go. Again, the same thing. People really cared about it. It was their livelihood. But the plant, the people, the difference is when you go to South America, a lot of the people that work in the factories have an advanced degree. So really? we think it's a big deal here in the United States to go to college and get a bachelor's or a master's degree, right? And mm-hmm. then you go get a
real job,
a non-factory job, right? Mm-hmm. But in these other countries, it's a big deal for these people to get a technical degree after their grammar school. Some of them called grammar schools. Once they graduate, they go to a technical school, and they become trained to do advanced math and problem-solving skills, and they're working in the factory, and they're the best employees to work with because you don't have to give them a lot of direction. You can point out the issue or give them the expectations, and they deliver. American Samoa, again, great people, but you really had to spell it out for them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people probably didn't have much of a 6th grade education on that island, but
so
great people who really
think
cared
for themselves. They did exactly what you told them, exactly how you told them,
exactly,
and the exact steps
you
told them.
It. Yeah.
But the ones in Ecuador actually were kind of like what you in the beginning when you said you taught the people on the line to actually do things. So in Ecuador, you probably could teach those people to do things on the line that you didn't have to.
It was a lot easier, and they understood it better, and it was sustainable. It was very sustainable because they really cared. They wanted to do more,
So are we getting the same tuna out of Ecuador as we're getting from the American Samoa Islands?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
different parts of the ocean.
Now, where in Africa did you go?
So Star-Kissed through Dongwon bought a plant in Senegal. So Dakar, Senegal. I had never been to Africa before. And so the Dongwon portion of the business, the South Koreans were trying to get this plant started, but they couldn't get it sustainable. There were some labor issues. They just had some difficulty communicating, with the people. So our engineer and myself went into Dakar and we worked with them. Our VP of operations went down there. He helped. We just turned it around because of the trust that the people had with us, better communication, and I think we could just teach them how to do the processes better. So it was more sustainable, and we turned the plant around, and they became a big producer of pouches for us.
How big is that plant?
I can't exactly remember the tonnage, but out of the three, it was the smallest.
How many people? How many employees?
They probably had about 500 people working there. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I liked your definition of small. I'm thinking 30 people.
Well, there's a lot of labor involved with cleaning tuna. So in Samoa, just for an example, big plant, 1,000 people per shift just cleaning fish.
What's involved in cleaning tuna?
So cleaning tuna, it's coming out of that pre-cooker. They're taking off the head. If somebody's
so it goes in the cooker, complete fish.
Complete fish.
Okay.
Yep. Comes out of that cooker, cooled. People on the line then are deheading it.
Okay.
They are filleting it, taking the bones out,
Okay.
and then taking these fillets and putting them in specific trays to be weighed to go to the filler. So all that, the skin, the skin's got to come off with the scales. The bones got to come out, so there's no bones in the product. Nobody wants bones in tuna.
Mm-mm. But yet we don't mind bones in our canned salmon.
Right.
That's absolutely fine. I don't know. The last can I thought I did. Saw it in there.
Yeah, but the market has changed because Starkist became a big seller of canned salmon. So we had to actually go to start selling salmon like we do tuna. We had to find these packers in Alaska and the West Coast that would actually take the salmon and debone it and skin it like tuna and put it in the small cans, like just the fillet pieces. Because, the canned tuna or the canned salmon that your mom or grandparents would buy, mine same, they knew how to handle it. They'd take it out, take out the bones, the cartilage, make the salmon patties, and everybody was good.
I did that in the last year. I know I've done that.
Today's consumer,
no, they would be freaked out.
They were freaked out.
Because the skin's in there, but the little teeny bones, they just dissolve.
Right.
You could probably throw all the bones in there; they all dissolve.
Most of them were just very, very soluble in your mouth.
Yeah, you just take that spine out of there. I'm not going to tell you I enjoyed it, but I wasn't afraid of it.
Right.
I didn't look at it and go, oh, there's something wrong with this.
Yeah, we had today's consumer, some of them buying that product and just finding it totally disgusting and not even eating it, and then wanted their money back because they didn't know what they were buying.
Oh, yeah. It had the oil content and everything. It was...
The label said exactly what was in the can. This product contains skin and bones.
Yeah. I've always bought it. I never even thought about that at all. I'm going to have to go buy the new one and see what it's like.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll like that better. So after they took all the bones and all the skin and everything and they put... Now, this is a big assumption on my part. If it's a nice compact piece, then they could use that as the higher level. All the little chunks and pieces went in the 49-cent can.
Right. So there's two types. There's chunk style, and then there's the solid pack. So those nice fillets would go to the solid pack product, and that was kind of formed into a puck and put into the can, whereas the chunk and the pieces were put into this filler where it was going through a drop and filling it by the top of the can in chunks. Chunk filler.
I kind of buy my tuna based on price. The higher price, I figure it's the higher quality. It's the 49-cent can. It's probably
it's
all
still
the pieces.
It's just kind of like, what kind of quality of car do you want? Do you want the Yugo or do you want the Denali? So it's the same with tuna. It's all good quality. It's just how you define it.
Right. So if I don't want broken pieces, I go up to the higher price stuff. But if I don't care about all the broken shredded ones.
My wife Denise was an avid consumer of the canned cheap tuna to make tuna salad. But once I started getting her hooked on the pouch, she liked it, but she still prefers paying the price for the regular canned tuna.
I prefer the can over the pouch.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, because I think the pouch is too smushed.
Too
I don't know.
smushed.
Yeah, it's kind of
Well, it's because it's
smushed.
well, it is flat. It's flat because of that thermal processing
Yeah.
again, where you don't want it to be, can't be too chunky. It's got to be flat.
Right. I want
and
chunky.
no pouches can be touching each other on the trays when they go into the retort, because that affects the time temperature relationship.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not a big consumer of tuna, so
Yeah.
but I'm still back on the tuna salad and the
No, but the R&D team led by Glenn Mass, they did a great job with all the different flavors.
Oh, I know.
It really had opened up the market to more consumption of tuna.
I'm sure it did. But now at these plants, there's a lot of training involved in butchering tuna.
Actually, there is, because the plant's graded by yield. So pounds of fish coming in and pounds of meat going out is how the plants are gold. And the whole financial is set up on recovery, tuna meat recovery. So albacore, you're looking at like a 62 to 64% recovery of meat, whereas the skipjack tuna was more like 54 to 56% recovery.
Okay. Now, we talk a lot about quality control, quality assurance, food safety, because when I was always taught this about, as a layman's terms, quality control was like, is it the right temperature? Is it the right weight? Is it, meeting all the parameters? Quality assurance was more like reaching for what you wanted it to be. Like, we have the minimum for quality control. You're just measuring things. You don't care. You're just reporting it. But quality assurance was more like looking at it. How do we improve it? How do we, like in your case, yield? How do we get better yield out of this? Things like that.
No, right. You're right. Quality control is more reactive. It's more defined. And quality assurance is trying to be more proactive. How do we do better? How do we make improvements?
Yeah. And food safety, is it just safe for us to eat?
And food safety is like now the big umbrella over everything is just, is the plant clean? I mean, food safety has evolved from the product, the equipment, to the environment, right? Making sure that even the environment, the manufacturing plant is clean and it's designed well so that it can be cleaned easily.
And that's where sanitation comes in.
That's where sanitation comes in. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Now, back to your dairy part. That, like people think about, you make these products, and I know this is what my misconception I find with people is that they think you guys make the product all day, and then before you go home, everybody cleans up. And then the next day they come in and make it some more.
Yeah.
And I don't think they realize that, first of all, plants run 24 hours. And then some products, they don't break the equipment down and clean it. They clean it by running, chemicals and water through it, which we call clean in place.
Right.
So talk about that for a bit and how the different sanitation comes into the food safety.
Yeah. So in the plants that I touch, it's always about, we're cleaning to be successful for the production run. We're not cleaning because the plant's dirty or because the production's over. We're cleaning to have a good, successful run. Because like you said, gone are the days where you're running 2 shifts, 2 8-hour shifts of production, then you're cleaning on night shift every day. That doesn't happen anymore. Now with, food plant design and food safety and controlling the environment and better design of equipment, now we're able to manufacture products, 2 weeks, 15 days straight before we have to do a clean. Now, obviously there's some there's operational cleaning that has to happen. I don't want people to think that we never shut down, but we're talking about maybe shutting down for 30 minutes or an hour, and some specific equipment are being cleaned operationally so that the product maintains its quality and food safety state. But now we've gone to these long extended manufacturing runs. And so it's it's critical that the cleaning is done right up front. You're not cleaning because a plant's dirty or you're done. You're cleaning to have these successful long production runs.
But this equipment was built with that in mind. I mean, these equipment companies build this so cleaning can happen.
In the dairy industry, yes. But some of the other industries I've been in, we've transformed into that. We've gotten better equipment in so that we can do those runs better.
Now, in dairy, because it's liquid and they're running it all through these pipes and everything, they just flush them.
Yeah, clean in place.
Yep. Yeah, just flush them.
But there's a lot of exterior cleaning too. You still got to take valves apart, gaskets apart. There's a lot of pathogens that can stick in valves and gaskets if you're not careful.
So what is your thought on the in the dairy industry of raw milk, people wanting to buy raw milk that's unpasteurized?
If you're not drinking raw milk within 24 hours of milking the cow at a cold temperature, then you shouldn't be touching it. I mean, I drank raw milk working on a dairy farm because I knew where it came from. It was fresh. I drank it within 24 hours of it being collected. But, I would not. I mean, I wouldn't allow my kids or my family to buy raw milk. You don't know where it's coming from. It's very susceptible to bacteria growth, obviously, because of the nutrients in the milk. And pasteurization is there for a reason.
Yeah. So when you go to the grocery store, I've seen raw milk. I never looked at the date on it. So they're saying that it's good for a week or two?
It depends. I'm not sure. It depends who you're buying it from and what controls they have in place. How clean is their environment?
Yeah. All right.
I mean, when you're milking I worked on a farm. When you're milking a cow, your parlor, has manure in it. You're cleaning the udder. You're sterilizing the udder as best you can with iodine in the wash solution. But that milk is not bacteria free.
What's the advantage to raw milk? Why are people doing it?
People believe that raw milk are higher in nutrients because you're not, pasteurizing it, so they feel that anything that's cooked, you're ruining some of those nutrients. So they think raw milk's better for you.
Okay. Yeah, because the only time I ever take anything that's unpasteurized is apple cider.
Yeah.
And it's usually, I bought it, I saw them press it and I bought it, and it's not good. It's good for a week.
It's good for a week.
And then it starts turning into some lovely vinegar and stuff.
Yeah.
What is happening in pasteurization? What are they actually doing when they pasteurize something?
So what we're doing in pasteurization is we're actually killing the bacteria that is going to make that product spoil.
So just cooking it, they're heating it.
Yeah.
And does it kill all the nutrients, or is it just killing bacteria?
It just kills bacteria.
That's
right. I mean, it might change the flavor, obviously, but it's not destroying. People also have this belief that if canned vegetables are less nutritious than frozen vegetables. That's not true either, because fresh vegetables are being canned. They're being preserved at the peak of their freshness as well. I mean, frozen vegetables are pre-cooked before they're frozen. You don't just take vegetables off the farm and put them in a plastic bag and freeze them. They still have to be blanched to stop the enzyme activity.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
they're way more attractive, though. Canned ones are not attractive.
Yeah. It, depends if your grandkids, what textures they like.
I guess I've never, I don't eat canned vegetables, but.
Oh, I have grandkids that don't like frozen beans, but they'll eat canned beans because of the texture.
Oh, I've never tried them on it.
Yeah.
I'm usually afraid.
But there's no difference in nutrients, but yeah.
Yeah. I stayed away from canned food for the sodium level. That's my big thing, for the sodium level. But I never thought of trying the kids on that.
But you can buy canned vegetables with no sodium.
Yeah, I know. I'm one of those people. I eat mostly fresh vegetables. I even stay away from frozen vegetables. I really like vegetables, and I like them fresh.
Yeah.
So that's green beans are bought fresh. Broccoli's bought fresh.
That's the one advantage of having a global market, is that we can get strawberries all year. We can get lettuce all year and all these vegetables year round.
Yeah. I don't think people realize that because when we were young, I remember we got strawberries in June.
Yeah, that was it.
You got
Then
orange.
you canned strawberry jam,
Yeah.
so you could have strawberries on your toast in the winter because
Yeah.
you weren't getting it any other way.
And you had oranges, the best oranges in December and January.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
And you,
your relatives would bring them up from Florida in cases.
yeah. You had only fresh tomatoes, sliced tomatoes on a sandwich in the summer.
Yeah.
You didn't have, there was no tomato in your sandwich in January.
Nope.
You know, part of me misses that because it was one of those things where you look forward to something like that.
Yeah, definitely
Now-
appreciated home canning more than we do now.
Yeah. Well, I do home canning. I canned spaghetti sauce last week. This year, I don't know if everybody's talking about this, but we certainly are around here. Our gardens went crazy. Absolutely crazy. And I planted the same amount of tomato plants I always plant. If I get 3 jars of spaghetti sauce, I just make it and we eat it like that week and say la vie, go on. This year, I had so many. I probably canned a dozen jars of it. And that takes a lot of tomatoes just to make
Right.
that because I wasn't putting
Yeah,
anything
you're
else
cooking
in
them
them.
down.
Oh, yeah. And then the apple trees went crazy. And I picked apples from several trees in the neighborhood, people that didn't want the apples because they're like, last year
many.
they had no apples, 0. These trees didn't produce a single apple. This year, I picked 2 bushels in about 15 minutes off my neighbor's tree. Then I went to another tree, picked a couple of bushels off that, and I started making applesauce. So I've been making applesauce like crazy. And I made the applesauce and I gave it to one of my children. And he said to me, he goes, that was good, but you put too much sugar in it. I go, excuse me? I
Really?
didn't put a single grain of sugar in there.
Wow.
Nothing. There's nothing in that jar except apples. I cooked the apples down and that's it.
Huh.
And he was like, wow, tastes like you put sugar in it. And I said, I just used 3 different neighbors' apples. And I know one was Granny Smith, one was like a Gala, and one was a Red Delicious or something. No, I think it was Red Delicious, but I just blended them all together.
Yeah.
Because I just kept cooking apples till it's crazy. We canned a lot of stuff.
Love canned homemade applesauce.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some before you leave.
Great.
You'll get some of that. But we had it was a bumper crop this year, and it was really good. So now we have moved on from Starkist, and you've got a whole. You're like in another food category.
Yeah, and the food category I've never been in. Salty snacks.
Yeah.
It's been a joy with this company. Great company to work for. They really have a great culture about keeping people safe and taking care of people. And number one priority is the people. Then the second thing is customers, obviously, because we're a big co-manufacturer and private label maker. But yeah, we make food fun. That's for sure.
Okay. Name all the different snacks you make. Potato chips,
We make
pretzels.
we're the largest hand kettle potato chip maker in the United States.
Okay.
We that's our number one bread and butter. Then all the other potato chips, the Ripple, the Ridges, the smooth cut, and then we do tortillas, chips, the bite size, and then we do extruded cheese puffs and cheese balls.
That's the one thing I don't like those, but
Oh, they're good. Kids like them.
I heard years and years, I heard this not too long ago, but it was years ago, I guess, Frito-Lay, when after the World War II was done and they had all this powdered cheese and they didn't know what to do with it. They had no idea what to do with this powdered cheese from, they were using to make, I guess, macaroni and cheese for the war effort. They gave it to Frito-Lay and said, see if you can do something with it. And that's where we got the powdered cheese flavoring on top of Doritos and
Oh, wow.
cheese puffs and everything like that. It came through a super, supply of it from the government that said, here, do what you want with it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I know. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I think we'd never have
Some
that.
Things like that happen. Yeah.
So you make tortilla chips and use flaxseed, don't you?
No, we use corn.
You don't? Don't you put flaxseed in some of the multigrain ones?
No, we don't.
You
We got
don't?
out of the multi-grain before I started.
Why?
I don't know. It wasn't a big seller.
Oh, that's my favorite one.
Yeah. So wasn't
Yes.
a big seller. They got out of the multigrain. We got out of the sesame too because of allergy issues and controlling allergens in the plant. And that wasn't a big seller either. But no,
So you don't use flaxseed in anything?
no.
You know why I asked that question? Is that my grandson is allergic to flaxseed.
Wow.
And they don't put it on the label.
Hmm.
Not all the labels have it because it's a small amount, a trace amount, so it goes below that 2%.
Yeah.
They don't put it. And some of them just call it grains.
Hmm.
You know, like how they say it's spices?
Yeah.
They call. So we have to be careful of everything he eats because
Wow.
he's highly allergic to flaxseed. And it's not considered an allergen because
Yeah.
sesame seed
yeah.
just made it up there.
Right.
And they're hoping flaxseed makes it real soon so that we won't have this issue.
Right.
Because we don't know what to feed him sometimes. I mean, he's not quite 2 years old.
Well, maybe he'll grow. Hopefully he'll grow out of it.
They don't know. They're
Yeah.
afraid to even test him for it anymore. It's so bad.
Hmm.
And, that's the one because I like the multigrain tortilla chips from Aldi.
Okay.
So we can't have them when he's here.
Hmm.
We have to go straight regular.
Yeah, but the tortilla chips are, I had no idea how tortilla chips were made until I started this job. And we take corn and we cook it and then we soak it to get the corn to soften up so we can grind it. We grind the corn into a masa paste and then we press that masa paste into sheets and we cut out the shapes and we bake to get the moisture to a specific level before it goes into the fryer. It's just corn and oil.
That's it.
That's it.
Well, I heard years ago how they make cornflakes. And one of the
Gotta be
R&D.
pretty close. Yeah.
Well, they take the corn and I guess they soak it or whatever.
Yeah, the degerminant. Yep.
And they put it through rollers to make it a squished flake. And then they bake it. And all that's in there is the water, the corn, and a little bit of salt that they cook it with.
Yeah.
And that is it.
Yeah. Same with tortilla chips.
I mean, you just smash
corn,
it.
Corn and oil.
So every time you eat a cornflake, it's just one piece of corn smashed. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have assumed it's baked. I don't think they fry
No, that's probably
cornflakes.
baked.
It's just a baked, that's it. That's the whole process.
Yeah.
And they make millions of dollars off of this, except we cannot make it at home. So have you found any different safety things in snack foods than you did in all these other processed foods?
Yeah. So this is a little different, right? Because now you've got a product that's baked and fried, and now you're post lethality step, you're applying a seasoning. So obviously these spices, the barbecue spices, all these different chili powders and stuff like that, you've got that risk of salmonella. So all our suppliers have to certify that their seasonings that they sell to us are ready to eat, that they have put in place into their food safety plans, all those food safety controls that prevent that seasoning from being contaminated with salmonella.
And that's the big difference.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
we got to make sure our plant is clean on the back end post fryer. And we do swabbing just like you would in a frozen food plant or a bakery. We swab the environment to make sure that we don't have any pathogens that can contaminate our equipment that then can potentially contaminate the product.
I tell people what swabbing is.
So swabbing is you take a sponge, we call it a swab, but it's like a gigantic Q-tip.
Mm-hmm.
It's a plastic handle with a sponge on it, and you typically swab a 4-inch by 4-inch square on pieces of equipment or product contact surfaces. And then we put that into a peptone broth, and then it goes off to a lab and they incubate it. They do what they got to do to get the microbes to grow if there's any present. Then they culture them out, and then they can identify the different species of the bacteria.
How long does that take?
Well, it's gotten a lot better. It's now they've got it down to some of these pathogens can be detected in 48 hours, where, back in the 80s, it could take 2 weeks. So a lot
So
of
you were
development.
producing for 2 weeks and found out you had a contamination?
Well, that's why I loved working in the low acid canned food industry, because we were cooking it to death. So we didn't have that issue.
Well, you kind of prove one thing that I've always told quality people. If you get a job in the quality area, you can change food areas. You don't have to stay.
Right.
If you're an R&D and you do R&D of, I don't name
Yeah.
something like candy or ice cream or soup or what, you're kind of stuck. You end up being an expert in that area because people always want to hire you for what you know.
Yeah.
So it's next candy company hiring you, the next candy company. So R&D people don't really change their area too much, but quality, you can go from company, and you've proved it.
Right. And that was kind of what I said to myself when I was in college and taking food science classes. There were, some of my friends in class were sticking to, this is where they wanted to focus. And I was the opposite. I wanted to learn as much as I could about everything. I took grains and bakery classes. I took fermented foods. I took processed foods. I did self-studies where there wasn't enough students to take classes for like juice processing or fruit processing or things like that. I went in with a mindset. I wanted to learn as much as I could so that I could be, available to any company that wanted to hire me and not be pigeonholed. And I've kind of lived that in my 37 years. I've moved around to all these different food groups.
And you've never had a break in your career either.
No, never had a break. I'm ready for one.
You are? You're not telling everybody you're retiring, are you?
I'm getting close. I've been working since I've been 14 years old.
Yeah. Well, do you enjoy going in the plants?
I love it.
Tell us a little bit of what it's like to go into a plant, because I don't think people realize how hot or cold or loud or big. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's loud. There's a lot of things moving. So going into a plant, typically you've got to wash your hands before you go in. You got to don hairnets, sometimes specific uniforms or lab coats. And you got to wear earplugs. And nowadays you got to wear safety shoes so that you don't slip or hurt your feet in the factory floor.
Oh, I was in a plant once where you had to walk through
boot scrubber.
Yeah, you had to walk through this liquid and stuff so your feet had no dirt, germs, or whatever.
Some plants have boots that you have to wear, like meat plants, tuna plants. We had to wear boots. Some plants that are more drier atmosphere, it's just work boots, work shoes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you typically got to go through a boot scrubber or a foot bath or crystals. Sometimes they'll throw down dry crystals that you have to walk through that have an antimicrobial effect on your shoes. Hard hat, safety glasses most of the time. So you're all donned up, hairnet, earplugs, lab coat, safety glasses, helmet. And
everybody has their name on them because you can't recognize them after this, right?
Right. No, you can't recognize them. But it's hot. The retort areas are usually hot because you got a lot of cooking vessels there with a lot of steam coming out because you're venting the retorts. The meat plants are typically cold. They keep the environment around 40 degrees because they want the pathogens not to multiply. The hotter it is, the faster they grow. The chip plants the salty snack plants, some of them are hot in the summertime. We got a plant in Phoenix. Sometimes it's brutal there in the summertime, but we've implemented air conditioning, employee water stations. They supply these like Gatorade popsicles, electrolyte popsicles and stuff to keep people hydrated. But there's odors, the pickle plant, when we sliced jalapenos, it's brutal, right? Because the oil's coming off the seeds. And when you're cutting the jalapeno slices.
Did they wear goggles?
They had to wear goggles. They had to wear gloves. We had to change our policy on consuming food in the plant to allow them to have like a mint in their mouth. Sometimes that would relieve, the stress that they were under working with the jalapenos.
Yeah, I know you get that from garlic too.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh,
just
slicing onions. You ever been in a onion ring factory?
no. That would be terrible.
Oh, well, here's the thing: the people who work in an onion ring factory, you never see them crying because they got used. They get used to it very quickly. But if you were a visitor, oh my gosh, you couldn't stand it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the general public think that food plants are big kitchens, and they think that there's people that go to work to cook the food.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would go to a restaurant to cook the food. I don't think they realize that this is a highly automated, plant that you're just
a lot of equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of it is very hands off. These employees are not touching the food.
Yeah.
And
that's
then in
true.
other plants, they're touching it continuously.
Right. In the salty snacks, once the potatoes are sorted for any, size issues or, issues with knots or, sometimes there's roots stuck to the potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Once those potatoes get past that station, they're peeled, they're rinsed and they're sliced and nobody's touching them.
Mm-mm. Not even when they go in the bag.
Nope. Not touched at all.
No.
Yep. Tuna, a lot of hands-on use because of the skinning and deboning.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot in the pickle industry, but you did have people that were hand packing pickles because pickles are hard to fill in an automated filler. You can fill relish pretty easily, but when it comes to the big dills or the little dills, those were all hand packed.
Yeah.
Hand labor.
Yeah, the pickled chips will just go like relish.
Right. Yep.
Not a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Soup was all, didn't touch anything except on the raw side. You had people on trim and pear tables doing potatoes and carrots and whatever before it was going into the soup kettles.
Yeah, I don't think they were. I was in a food plant and it was cold. It was a meat plant and it was not a slaughter or anything. The meat came as an ingredient. They were making
cuts.
They were making taco meat.
Oh, okay.
So they were browning it and adding the seasoning and sending it off to places like Taco Bell. They were slicing bacon.
Yeah.
But it was already smoked, all that stuff. They were just doing the end part of it. And so it was the summer and they said, make sure you bring your coat with you and, long pants and everything and boots. And I went in there and they gave me gloves to wear. And I mean, winter gloves, and then put the plastic glove over top of it. So we washed our hands, we put the gloves on.
And more protection.
And we put the other glove on. And I don't think people realize that, another funny one is I always think is that you go to the deli at the grocery store and the employees there tend to think that the gloves are for them, like to keep their hands clean. And so you want some sliced meat and the person touches their nose.
Right.
And you say, could you change your gloves? And they're just insulted. Like, why would I change my gloves? But you just touched your face and now you're going to touch my food.
Yeah.
And then I see them come out of the back with a mop in their hand and their gloves. And then they want to handle your food. And I say, could you change your gloves? I'm like, what? And I said, well, you were mopping. They're like, yeah, I had my gloves on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the point. So I'm in this food plant and this guy tells me after I do all this, he goes, I have to remind you, do not touch your face.
Yeah.
Don't touch anything with those gloves. Now, we weren't doing anything with the food. We were just walking through. And he said, don't touch anything. Right. And so when we get away from the food, then we'll take those gloves off and your winter gloves will be for you to hold on to handles. We were climbing ladders and stuff. And we were doing that.
Yeah.
But I don't think people realize that those gloves are not for them. They're for the food.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in trying to get out of gloves as much as you can because it's a lot easier to wash and sanitize an employee's hands than it is the gloves. Once the person has the gloves, you kind of lose control what they're doing with it. If it's ripped, nothing's more embarrassing to find, the finger part of a glove in a product, which has happened a couple times. Consumer returns what's left of a glove or something like that, and you just think,
Well, an educated employee in a food plant, I think, is probably very safe without a glove.
Yeah.
But And
It's easier to wash their hands.
Yeah. But I'm not so sure in some of these other
the
places.
Sandwich shops drive me crazy because they'll slice their meat, make your sandwich, and they still have the gloves on, and then they go handle your money.
Yeah.
And money's the dirtiest thing in the world. Right?
Yeah. I tell them, no, thanks. But, well, I think that we've covered about everything you can about quality.
Yeah, I think so.
I hope we haven't scared too many people. Do you have any last stories for us or anything? I'll tell you, you did have one story for me, and if you don't want to tell it, we'll edit it out.
Okay.
But you told me about cleaning a kettle that was from that had been continuously used.
Yeah.
You said forever.
Yeah.
Like since the 1920s.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention any names.
Okay.
So the kettle was named Big Bertha.
How big was Bertha?
This kettle was probably about 20 feet tall and probably 6 feet in diameter. It was big enough that a person could get into it. Okay. It would still be confined space. But Big Bertha is this big tank, and Big Bertha's got this big long shaft and just a propeller probably 3 feet from the bottom of the tank. That's it. No side scrapers, nothing like that. So Big Bertha was a reservoir prior to filling. So the product was made, the product was pre-cooked and heated, and then everything came into Big Bertha. Then Big Bertha fed the fillers. Well, one day we started getting complaints that, back to the ketchup story, right? It's kind of like that. These products were blowing up because of gas production. And so the plant goes back. We tell the plant to go look at retain samples, and the retain samples are not looking good. So we're like, what's going on? So we clean Big Bertha. We look at Big Bertha. We look at the process because there was heat exchangers involved. We went through the heat exchanger to make sure that we didn't have any pinholes that were contaminating the product. We went through this process with the best intentions. Just tore it apart, right? Tore it apart, put it back together, cleaned it. Still having issues. And the product that was coming out of Big Bertha was a high profit, high margin product. So very critical to the business. Bottom line is, kept having the issues and couldn't understand why. The moral of the story is you got to get these tanks capable of doing cleaning in place, because what was happening was we finally got a camera, one of those scope cameras, and we got a guy that got in the tank and he got underneath that propeller, and that propeller was just the nastiest thing you've ever seen. We were cleaning the blades on the top, but we weren't getting the blades on the bottom.
And these were big blades.
These were big blades. What had happened was this line runs 24/7.
Forever. Years.
High margin product. Went through a Christmas break where for the first time this plant was down for 2 weeks for some maintenance issues. So this line was down for 2 weeks.
For the first time.
Even though the line was cleaned, because we didn't clean it thoroughly, this product buildup underneath the blades was just, bacteria was just going to town on it.
You said you crawled in there.
I did not crawl.
You didn't
in there,
crawl in.
But we had somebody else. But I was there when we were showing live images of what was underneath that.
This is like the camera you put down through the sewer lines and stuff.
These are you buy brand new ones for this type of work.
Right.
Yeah.
But you look and you see every single thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
So Big Bertha got jerked out of there because it was way too big. It's a continuous process. You had heat exchangers in line, so that tank didn't need to be that big. So the line got optimized, the tank got ripped out, better mixing, smaller tank, CIP put in place.
Well, it's just one of those cases where they didn't fix it because it wasn't broken.
Wasn't broke until you had downtime. Yeah.
So it went and we're talking about years and years and years.
Right.
And they
never had an issue.
Yep. And then now they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That was one I remembered you telling me about. Like we hadn't torn this line. I'm thinking, you haven't torn this line down in years?
Just ran constantly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now better process, better product, probably.
Yeah.
Or just as good.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we've covered everything we could ever cover. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate your stories.
Yeah.
I appreciate you explaining everything to us.
Okay.
And I've known you forever.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize how many products you did.
Yeah.
I never really thought about it. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah. Hopefully my next move is ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about the ice cream. You didn't bring me any ice cream.
No, I didn't have time.
But you do make, I see them.
So that's my hobby business is making ice cream. Right now we have 8 grandchildren. So most of it's making ice cream for the family and all the birthdays.
And you make really interesting ice cream. We're not talking chocolate and vanilla.
Right. I've got probably 30 flavors. I've got alcohol-based flavors. It's been interesting. I started baking ice cream when I was in food science at Ohio State. That was one of our projects in the dairy foods class, and just stuck with me. And I've, improved it over the years. And actually, between my time at Heinz and Starkist, I actually got to take my formula and run it at the pilot plant at Ohio State because I wanted to see how it ran at a pilot plant versus a kitchen.
Did it do well?
It did well, except that we over homogenized the product. We had too much pressure on the homogenizer, and it made kind of like a mousse more than an ice cream.
Yeah. But that's trial and error.
Trial and error,
that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if you make ice cream, like there are certain things that I've made. I make jam and jelly, and everybody wants it for a gift.
Yeah.
So you have like endless gifts.
Same thing with my ice cream. Everybody wants me to make ice cream for their birthdays or something.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you want to give somebody a present, you just make some ice cream.
Right.
And then you just give them a quart and you eat the rest.
Yeah.
Oh, because I've seen some of the flavors. I've seen pictures of you having out in the driveway, 2 or 3 going at a time.
Right. I'm up to 3 ice cream makers. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I make it in mass.
I have to think of my favorite flavor to tell you to make me. Okay.
My most popular requested flavor is chocolate amaretto.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Mine would be something in the salted caramel with chocolate. My thing is it's not just the ice cream, but it's what you put on it.
Oh, see, my philosophy is to try to get the flavors, natural flavors. I don't use artificial. So it's natural flavors. I make my own caramel. I make my own butterscotch. I want the flavor to be in the ice cream so that you don't have to put anything on it. Like I make a blueberry cheesecake ice cream, a coffee toffee.
Yeah.
The only flavor I make that you can put toppings on, obviously, is vanilla, but I try to get the ice cream.
But you can't get variegates and ribbons in it, can you?
Sure I can.
Do you?
Yeah.
Wow.
I even made a ice cream for a fundraiser at one of my employers where it was called the Elvis Presley Peanut Butter Sandwich.
Okay.
That was the name of the ice cream. So it was in a little cup, 4-ounce cup.
Mm-hmm.
Half of the cup was banana ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Half of the cup was peanut butter ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the middle, I took an apple core and I cored out the middle. And in the middle, I put strawberry ice cream or strawberry pie filling.
Oh, yeah?
So banana peanut butter with strawberry pie filling.
Okay.
The Elvis Presley peanut butter sandwich.
See, I don't stir my ice cream up. So if I have like salted caramel and then put some chocolate on it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to stir it.
Right. You just want it drizzled on top.
No, I want it dumped. Lots of chocolate. I want it dumped. Like I don't like hot fudge because it melts the ice cream.
Yeah.
I want like Hershey syrup.
Right. I do too. My wife is a big fudge.
No. If there's a fudge ripple,
I'm
okay with that because it's cold.
Yeah. See, you've seen pictures of those Tupperware bowls that I use to freeze the ice cream in. Once that ice cream is in there layer by layer, I can take a spoon or a spatula and I can ripple the flavors in there and then put another layer, ripple it.
Yeah. The one ice cream that I dislike the most is cookie dough. Because that to me is just like lumps of sugar.
Yeah. My son likes cookie dough. I've made it a couple times for him. Not my favorite to make.
No, I don't like
But I did buy safe refrigerated cookie dough that was pasteurized.
Right. I mean, every time you go to Dairy Queen, the kids always want cookie dough.
Yeah.
My favorite Dairy Queen Blizzard is a mud pie.
Mm.
And you have to go to the Dairy Queen. Sometimes someone will hand you a mud slide. And I'm like, no, it's a mud pie. It's the Hershey syrup, Oreo, and coffee.
Mm.
That's what it is. So you could make it with the chocolate ice cream, but they always make it with the vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
They put the crushed Oreos and this is their flavor they came up with. I didn't come up with it.
Yeah.
But I've gone to different ones and they're like, no, we don't make that one. And I'm like, do you have coffee? And they're like, yeah. I said, do you have Oreos? Yeah. Do you have Hershey syrup? Yeah. I said, you can make it.
Yeah.
And even if you make it wrong, it can't be that wrong.
Yeah.
Just make it. I don't know what kind of coffee they're doing. I guess it's instant coffee. I don't know what they're putting in it.
So I make coffee toffee, and to get the coffee into the ice cream, what you do is once you've got your mix, I usually have the mix without the egg yolks, and then I heat that up to like 120 Fahrenheit, and I'll put a cup of coffee, coffee you'd put in a coffee maker. Mm-hmm. Take it off the stove, put a lid on it, and let it steep for like 25, 30 minutes. And then use one of those stainless steel strainers. And the coffee settles pretty easily. So if you're gentle pouring the mix out of the pot, you can usually get most of the crystals down at the bottom. But I do pour it through a strainer. But the coffee just steeps in the mix.
You don't put espresso in it?
No.
Huh. I do like the coffee ice cream.
I'll have to make you some coffee toffee.
Yeah. I'll probably put chocolate on it though. No, make me coffee with Oreos in it.
I can do that too.
No, make a mud. There you go. I told you my favorite is.
All right, mud pie.
Mud pie is my favorite.
All right.
All right, we done, Grant? Push all the buttons.